This portion is called tetzei, which means when you go out, referring to when Israel goes out to war. Begins in chapter 21, verse 10, and runs through to chapter 25, verse 19. Israel went to war against numerous enemies. Whenever Jews were in their promised land, the nations hated them and sought to eradicate them, hoping to wipe the name of Israel off the map. Well, those wars continue into the 21st century, and now the coalition of nations spoken of in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, Gog and Magog, is forming before our very eyes, whilst the heads of the nations, our own included, sagely nod their heads and warn Israel to abide by international law. Never mind about doing as we do as we say. Except this time, Israel has been stirred to be the lion that it is and is showing the nations how to wage war. Israel is fighting our war. In fact, our fighting the eternal war of civilization against savagery. Now, I'm making this video while Israel is fighting Hamas and Hezbollah. Hopefully, by the time you hear this video, that war will have been over. But I don't know. Who knows? Now, my point is this. Israel is no novice to battle. And this portion, tetzei, begins with God himself saying, quote, when thou goest forth to war, not if thou goest forth to war, but when. Now, we're going to skip right to the end of the portion, to chapter 25, verse 17 following, when God mentions a particular enemy and prescribes a particularly severe punishment. And there's a great lesson in this. Here's the quote. The Lord speaking, remember what Amalek did to thee by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt, when they chanced upon you, remember that phrase, chanced upon you en route, and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary. And he feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God hath given thee rest from all thine enemies round about, in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. Unquote. The United Nations were not there to issue a resolution against God over this decree. Amalek. What is so unique about this one nation? The Or HaChaim, who died in 1743, asked, how was it possible for Amalek to know where the Israelites were, being as the clouds of glory covered them in the wilderness? Well, he found his answer in the quote above that I just quoted. Amalek, quote, smote the hindmost of thee, unquote. They couldn't enter the clouds and dare not if they could, but they could follow after the clouds and attack those that were stumbling behind. He stresses that this does not refer to those who are physically tired. They would have received full protection. The reference is rather to those who are spiritually tired, whose connection to God had been allowed to wither. We use the term backslidden. They slid to the back, so to speak, and became vulnerable to attack. They were not under the cloud of glory. Now, for a deeper understanding of what was going on here, and the thing that is so relevant to us in these last days, we draw attention to two expressions in the text. Firstly, it says, Amalek feared not God. Now, this is a reference to the international fear that had fallen upon the nations in the ancient world after hearing of the terrible plagues that the God of Israel had inflicted on the Egyptians, culminating in a deep sea parting for 3 million Israelites to pass through safely, but closing on behind them, drowning the most powerful army in the world in those days, the Egyptian army. The nations feared this people that was being led forth from Egypt. Amalek was the first nation to dare to attack these obviously favored people. So Amalek broke the spell of invincibility, and this encouraged all of the nations to do the same. Secondly, the text uses the phrase, they chanced upon. Now, the word for chanced is karcha. It's derived from the root kar, which means cold. Now, I'll explain this. It's very interesting and there's a lot to learn. Amalek wanted to show the world that things happened by chance, karcha, that there was nothing special about Israel. There was no God of Israel who actually acted upon human history. It's just a lot of hearsay. It's a rumor. Everybody knows that gods are up there and don't bother themselves with men down here. The recent events in Egypt happened by pure chance. No act of a god. Rivers can dry up, locusts can invade, and children die through pestilence. It can all be explained away through natural means. And now we see what was going on spiritually. Amalek chanced upon Israel, karcha, from the root kar, meaning cold. Amalek's attack cooled down the nation's recent fear of the God of Israel as a result of the Exodus. At just the moment when fear and faith were on the rise, Satan used Amalek to bring back doubt of a God who acts in human history. So who knows how many of the nations would have forsaken their false gods and followed Israel's God. Maybe history would have been totally different. Now, this episode is relevant for all generations of believers, including and especially us. God says, thou shalt blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Thou shalt not forget it. So our modern day Amalek is the scientific worldview. The scientific worldview has managed, since Charles Darwin, to convince the Western world that everything can be explained by natural causes. There is no God, least of all one that acts in human history. Exactly what Amalek was doing. The Jews were probably never even in Egypt at all. Moses was probably a myth like King Arthur. And if Jesus ever existed, he was a failed freedom fighter for Israel against the Romans. And the story was embellished. Stories of the resurrection are clearly cases of mass hallucination, maybe. And the New Testament, well, that was a concoction of wild stories used by the church to gain power over the common people. I'm sure you've heard that argument. Well, they, of course, know all the answers, except they've become fools and expect us to join them. Beware this poison. It has reached a stage where they don't even have to prove what they say. People just say, but the scientists have proved it, haven't they? And faith in God is painted as a throwback to the medieval times before the white-coated priests, the scientists, turned up and often, in spite of themselves, had to continue the lies. Because if they don't continue the lies, they get sacked. Or fired, if you're an American. They get fired if they don't say what they're told to say and paid to say. Now, all of this insists on karcha, chance. Everything was just chance, including the whole creation of the world. It just came about by a chance meteorite passing or something. They've got 1,000 different theories, every one more ridiculous than the previous one. But it cools down many a Christian who could have been fervent for the Lord, and it may even prevent some people from being saved. So can you see the relevance? Jesus' words to the final church in Laodicea was this: thou art lukewarm. Revelation chapter 3, verse 16. Don't give the scientific worldview an inch, they'll take a mile. Now, we may not accept the godless scientific explanations, but there is the ever-present suggestion that everything that happens has a natural explanation. Religion is all right as a hobby, an interest, if that's what you need. They sometimes call it a crutch, don't they? But there's no direct connection between natural occurrences and piety or prayer or studying the Bible or loving God with all your heart. None of that matters. It's all optional. God tells us, Christians, to wage unceasing war against Amalek. Keep safe under the cloud of glory. That's Jesus.